Thank you. Good morning. So Keith talked about Rand's conception of the virtue of selfishness, and I want to talk about the flip side of the same issue, which is the evil of the opposite, the evil of altruism. And just to say that there's evil in altruism, I think for many people will sound just as paradoxical, if not more paradoxical, than saying there's a virtue in selfishness. It goes against the grain of just about everything we're taught growing up by our teachers, by our ministers, by our professors. So I want to talk about two things today. I want to first get clear on what we mean by altruism, and then I want to talk about why Rand, and I agree with her in regarding it as an evil thing. As I understand it, by the way, altruism is a term that probably has more currency in Brazil than it might in other places, because I understand that Auguste Comte has had a significant amount of influence in Brazil. He's the one who coined the term. I read today that there's a positivist temple right here in Porto Alegre. That's much of Comte's doing. So he's the one who coined the term. We'll come back to him a little bit later, I think. This is the wrong set of slides. I think it's the older one. Let me skip this one, and I'll run with it. First thing I want to clarify is that when we talk about altruism, we're not talking about the same thing as what you might call benevolence or generosity or just any kind of doing good things for other people. And one way to understand this is, well, altruism is typically defined in opposition to egoism. Egoism is doing things for your self-interest. But the interests of other people can often be in your own interest. And Keith touched on this somewhat. He talked about how there's no reason to think of living for yourself as necessarily coming at the expense of other people. He talked about the possibility of win-win relationships. But really, you can go further than that. We have friends, we have loved ones. And the reason that we make them our friends and our loved ones is because we share values and interests in common with them. And so it's not just that we want to see them happy. If we are selfish ourselves, we want to work for their happiness. We want to help them become happy themselves. We see that as paying the price. That's part of paying the cost of helping to make ourselves happy, if they really are our friends and our loved ones. So that's one point in understanding why when we talk about altruism, we're not talking about helping your friends, helping your loved ones. Altruism's evil, helping your friends and loved ones certainly isn't. But I want to bring out one other point to make clear why altruism is not the same thing as benevolence or generosity. And that's by saying that the most consistent altruists will often call for you to sacrifice the interests of your friends and loved ones for the sake of strangers. I have a few pictures up here. There were a few others that were supposed to go up. But I'll start with, think, for instance, from the gospel. What is it that Christ calls his apostles to do? He calls them to give up everything they have and to come follow him. And by everything here, that means not just their money, not just their time, but their relationships to their loved ones. In Matthew 10, he says, I come to divide father against son, mother against daughter. People need to be living for Christ in this viewpoint. And the altruistic demand is the same thing you see in holy orders. Monks and priests are called to be truly holy by living the exact same kind of life. That's why they're not supposed to have a spouse. They're supposed to live for God. There are secular versions of this. I have Peter Singer up here. That's actually a picture of him giving a talk in Porto Alegre. He's famous. He's an American-Australian philosopher. He's famous for thinking that if you make a decent amount of money and you spend not only too much of it on your own material comfort, but on your own family's material comfort, if you spend money giving your children a good education, if you spend it on taking them on a vacation, that's money that you could be spending to save the lives of starving people all over the world. And his idea is, as long as there are starving people out there, you shouldn't be spending any money on your own comfort or on the comfort of your family, because to devote too much time to your family, that's selfish. So the most consistent altruists, whether they're religious or secular, call for you to give up for the sake of others, even when that means giving up the help that you give to your own loved ones. So what is altruism really? And I think that the easiest way to summarize the answer is to say altruism is sacrifice especially of the self. This is actually something that you can see in the works of Comte. Comte coins the term altruism. Defined literally, it means otherism. Elsewhere, Comte said, what altruism asks us to do is to live for others, not to live for yourself. So the focus is on the others, but especially sacrificing for others, even when that means sacrificing the interests that you have in certain other people for the sake of the interests of strangers. So I don't remember quite how this older set of slides works, but I'm going to skip this. I now want to talk about the issue of why is altruism evil? And I've spoken about how altruism calls for sacrifice, even of your loved ones, to others. But which others? And in what way? And one thing I want to emphasize is that altruism, in calling for sacrifice, pays very little attention to actually achieving the good of others. If you think about Mother Teresa, for instance, and I originally had a picture here of Mother Teresa plus a picture of Bill Gates, American tech entrepreneur. Which one is it that altruism regards as the moral saint? Obviously her. Why? Because she lives a modest life. She has very little material comfort, but she dedicates herself to working for the poor, working for the hungry, in the last and most painful stages of their life. But if altruism were really about helping other people, why would she be the saint and not someone like Bill Gates or a tech entrepreneur? If you think about who is it that's really helped the greatest number of people over the longest period of time, not just to alleviate temporary pain, but to actually stand up on your own 2 feet, actually become productive, actually not need anybody's help anymore. The answer to that question is going to have to be someone like Gates. It's going to have to be him and other entrepreneurs who've created products, first of all, that all of us can use to benefit our lives, to learn more from, to communicate with people better, to receive translations in real time, wirelessly, right? And of course, there's secondary benefits that come from the creation of these products, the material prosperity that comes from jobs created, industries created, people, again, lifting themselves up. And you see this in a place like India, where they removed socialist controls in the early 1990s, and a flood of entrepreneurs came in, a flood of investment came in, people who might otherwise have been taken care of by Mother Teresa, who instead get jobs in call centers, instead get jobs as programmers. Bill Gates has helped many more people, and people like him have helped many more people than Mother Teresa, but he gets no moral credit. Why? Because, well, he's also benefited in the process of doing this. He's also made a lot of money, and so that means he's not giving up. Now, he does try to alleviate the guilt for this in the form of his philanthropy, but independent of that, he wouldn't get any moral credit. Altruism says only Teresa gets it because she's the one who's giving up. And notice how it's interesting. Doesn't matter so much to the altruists that nobody's actually benefiting so much from this. Maybe there's some pain relieved in the last moments of their life, but this is just a cycle that's going to recur. And there's a kind of worship of suffering that comes with this form of altruism. I'll make one last major point, and again, unfortunately, I don't have the right picture up here, but I just spoke a bit about to what altruism asks us to sacrifice. We know that we're supposed to give up ourself, and for the sake of others, though, as it turns out, there's not so much concern for whether the others are actually benefiting. As long as we're giving up ourselves, that's the standard of good, according to altruism. But what is it that we're... Oh, you found the right ones. Good. Thank you. I'm still going to skip that slide. But what is it that we're then asked to give up? We're supposed to give up ourselves. But what does that really mean? Now, this is something that actually was touched on in the last Q&A session. When people think about giving up yourself, the first thing that comes to mind is giving up your money, giving up your resources, giving up your time, giving up your energy. But the issue is that there's something more to yourself than just a bundle of money. You are not just a bundle of money and resources and time. What are you really, most fundamentally? And this came up in the question of, isn't the idea of a self, of an ego, doesn't it have some negative connotation? Well, it does if you think that the self is simply a bundle of desires and urges and instincts to acquire material stuff. But Ayn Rand thought, and Aristotle thought, the self is something bigger and deeper and more important than that. The self is the human mind. The self is the rational mind. It is that thing in you that thinks and chooses and values. And so, when altruists call for you to give up yourself, what they're really calling for you to do is to give up your mind. And there are a lot of examples that you can give to illustrate this point. And I'm glad we found the right slides, because here's the picture. Imagine, some of you probably have the experience of having maybe family members. Maybe there's someone in the family who's notoriously always down on his luck, or at least that's the way he puts it. And he's always asking for a handout. And if it were a different brother, you might want to help him out. But you know this one, let's say, is going to blow it. He's going to use the money on drugs, or he'll otherwise spend it unwisely. And maybe you want to attach some conditions to what he's going to spend the money on. But what altruism says in a case like this is you don't have the right to put conditions on the money that you're giving to somebody who's in need. After all, he's in need. He's demanding this help. Your job is to sacrifice to those who are in need. It's not to dictate your own conception of what might actually be good for their lives. That's so selfish. And I think that's a good example of how, and I see we have English ones now, but that's okay, how what they are calling for you to do is to sacrifice your judgment and your values. Your judgment, even of what might be good for others. And your values, which are the principles that you use to determine that. You have a value in hard work. You think that he would live a better life by working hard as well. But that's a selfish imposition. Altruism is calling for you to give up ultimately your mind when it calls for you to give up yourself. And you see this not just in interactions with family members, but you see it in geopolitical relationships where one richer country gives foreign aid to another and maybe wants to put, again, conditions on the aid. South America has experience with structural adjustment loans. These are usually conditions meant to help the economy from falling into the problems that caused it to need the bailout in the first place. Market reforms. But again, the altruists reject this and say, someone's in need, you're supposed to give it, you're supposed to give the aid, you're not supposed to judge what's going to be done with it. And the ultimate expression, I think, of this denial of the individual mind is socialism. And not just because socialism takes your money, but because it takes your freedom. And it takes your property. And it says all of these need to be subject to the vote of the majority. They need to be subject to what they call democracy. Democratization of the economy is how socialists often characterize their position. And what that view says is you are not competent to decide how to live your life, to decide how to live your life. The decision needs to be made by the majority of the people. So why, at the end of the day, is altruism evil? It's because, well, I mean, evil, I think, is something like willful destruction. What we've just talked about is a code that calls for those with ability and intelligence and strength and virtue to give up to those without. And that's calling for them to destroy themselves, and not even for the sake of some greater value, but really for the sake of pure destruction. Ayn Rand called this idea a morality of death. She offered as her alternative a morality of life, which Keith began to articulate in his last presentation. And I'll close today just with a brief quotation from her. This is from toward the end of the climactic speech in Atlas Shrugged. And she says, "In the name of the best within you, do not sacrifice this world to those who are its worst. In the name of the values that keep you alive, do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, and those who have never achieved his title." She goes on, "But to win the world you desire requires your total dedication and a total break with the world of your past, with a doctrine that man is a sacrificial animal who exists for the pleasure of others." I will draw a line here, and thank you very much. I'll take questions now.
Eu gostaria de fazer uma citação que, com certeza, tem muita sinergia com o que você colocou. Talvez uma das coisas mais difíceis de serem entendidas pela humanidade atualmente, em especial no Brasil, abre aspas, pessoas alistam-se à vontade entre os pacifistas, engrossam as fileiras de todos os exércitos da salvação do planeta, tornam-se apóstolos do humanitarismo, defensores contumazes da não-violência, sem saber o que são eles mesmos propagadores de lutas e divergências. A humanidade cria instituições beneficentes, organizações humanitárias, movimentos filantrópicos, que são o reflexo encarnado da sua falsidade, sua degradação. Altruísmo, humanitarismo tornam-se formas que seres usam para esconder de si mesmos a própria violência. São a forma com que alguns assumem a própria separação, a distância dos outros. A benevolência, a generosidade e o amor degradam-se e materializam-se em uma alma mendicante, no equívoco mais completo do verdadeiro sentido de fazer pelos outros, na degeneração última e extrema da caridade. Gostaria que você comentasse sobre isso.
Who was the author of that? Molyneux? Okay. Well, I don't have really too many things to say about that quotation. There were certain aspects of it that I would agree with. I don't think I would agree with all of it. I'd have to look at it again and probably get the original English, if that's where it's from. I do think that it's true that if what you're talking about are truly consistent altruists, like the kinds I was quoting from, that it's important that it's not a good intention, that they are simply mangling. Sometimes they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and this is often used to explain. They sometimes talk about the law of unintended consequences that's invoked to explain the failure of certain kinds of statist, collectivist economic policies. And you often hear this coming from people who consider themselves liberal or libertarian. And I think it's a mistake. I think that in the cases of the most consistent altruists who are the architects of these failed policies, they don't have good intentions. They don't actually want to help people, because if they did want to help people, they would look at the world and they would look at the track record of these kinds of policies. To use my earlier example, they would look at the difference between Mother Teresa and Bill Gates, and they'd see that the one who actually makes money for himself is the one who ends up benefiting the most people in the long run by creating a product that's valuable. And that if you impose policies that inhibit or restrict people like Gates, or who expropriate their wealth, that you're discouraging them from creating that value. You're making it even impossible for them to do it in some cases, which then means that no one else gets to benefit. So I don't see how an honest person can look at the world, propose so-called humanitarian policies that have the effect of restricting value creation, and regard that as an innocent mistake. I think that it is ill-intentioned, and very often at the bottom of these kinds of calls is a desire to destroy those who have achieved things. There's a kind of hatred of the good for being good, is what Ayn Rand called it, and she thought that the whole egalitarian movement today, the idea that there's something wrong with inequality in wealth and income, even if, yes, there are rich people getting richer, but the poor are getting richer as well. If you think there's a problem in that, well, there's a big gap between the two of them, that's the idea, well, it would be better off if everyone were equally shabby. And that's a desire for destruction. That's a kind of nihilistic kind of hatred of the good, where it doesn't matter what the effect is going to be on people. All that matters is that those who think they are the tall poppies get cut down. Another question?
Bom dia, muito obrigado pela palestra. A liberdade é a ausência da coerção. O livre-arbítrio é a nossa liberdade de ação. Eu gostaria de entender melhor por que Madre Teresa de Calcutá é colocada em contraponto a Bill Gates. Bill Gates foi com certeza um grande empreendedor que mudou a vida do planeta. Mas ele estava buscando os valores dele. Talvez ele estava buscando a felicidade dele no caminho. E muitas pessoas puderam se beneficiar da caminhada dele. Madre Teresa de Calcutá também me parece que estava buscando a felicidade dela. Dentro das capacidades dela, não me parece que ela pudesse ser uma grande empreendedora de repente, né? Mas ela fez o que para ela naquele momento fazia sentido. O que não deixa de ser uma virtude do egoísmo, dentro do momento que ela não coagiu ninguém a fazer por ela a caridade. Então eu vejo, por exemplo, governos socialistas que impõem, né, através do roubo chamado imposto, né, a caridade social, e isso sim me parece o lado ruim do altruísmo, né? Quando eu, governador, exijo a caridade através da sociedade, então eu imponho o que eu entendo que seja caridade, né, através da força e da coerção, né, eu espolho a população através do imposto, coleto esse imposto e faço a caridade que eu entendo que seja adequada. É um Bolsa Família ou qualquer projeto que seja nessa linha. Agora, quando falo em Jesus Cristo, por exemplo, e não que eu seja religioso nem nada, mas me parece que os apóstolos, ele botou as regras do jogo. Se vocês quiserem trabalhar comigo, é assim. Os apóstolos foram de livre arbítrio trabalhar com ele. Não foi uma coisa que foi imposta por uma pressão política. Então, se pudesse esclarecer melhor esse ponto para mim, te agradeceria. Obrigado.
Sure, this is a good question. I want to say two things in response. First is just to clarify, for reasons related to what I said at the beginning about why altruism is not the same thing as benevolence, I gave the example of how it's not the same thing as helping out your friends or your loved ones. It's not even the same thing as helping out occasional strangers when you can afford to do it, when it's no big cost, right? What altruism calls for is sacrifice. It calls for your giving up substantial amounts of your own wealth, as in what Peter Singer is calling for. So if instead you're talking about occasional charity for the sake of strangers who are in trouble through no fault of their own, there's no problem with that. Ayn Rand has no problem with that. I have no problem with that. The Ayn Rand Institute is a non-profit charity, right? So it's certainly the case that if you're going to advocate for a laissez-faire capitalist economy and the abolition of welfare payments, and this is a question that will probably come up later today when we talk more about politics, that private voluntary charity is the way to go, and that we would probably need much less of it, even than what we have today if the economy was unregulated. So one point is that in speaking against altruism, I'm certainly not speaking against all forms of charity. There's nothing incompatible there with egoism. Just as you can benefit from seeing the happiness of people who you love, you can also benefit from seeing the happiness of certain kinds of strangers, because you have a general respect for life. That's the one point. But now let me come back to Mother Teresa, because even though I don't mean to cast aspersion on all forms of charity, I do mean to do it against her. And I think it's a common mistake to believe that everyone is really out to pursue their own happiness. It's a hard thing for people who really are concerned with pursuing their own happiness to understand this point, I think. But it's related to a point that Keith brought up, that pursuing your rational self-interest is not the same thing as just doing what you want. He gave the example of how, well, eating lots of donuts isn't necessarily good for you, even though you may want to do it. But that applies in spades to wanting to devote your entire life to the salvation of the souls of the poor, for instance. She may want to do it, but that doesn't mean that it actually contributes to a long-range, flourishing, happy, rational life. And another way to see this point is to understand that there's a big difference between the pursuit of a positive goal, like happiness, and the pursuit of, or rather the avoidance of, a negative. It's true that many people are running away from danger. That doesn't mean they're running towards something good. In the case of someone like Mother Teresa, I think it's true that she was afraid that she would go to hell. Although she didn't really even believe in it. I mean, from what I've read, she was racked by doubt in her faith for most of her life. And so her effort, it's really, go onto YouTube and watch a short documentary that was done by Christopher Hitchens for the BBC. It's called Hell's Angel, about Mother Teresa, and how the thing she was most concerned about was not saving lives or stopping even people from starving, but baptizing them to save their soul. And this was out of a deep-seated neurosis of hers, I think. Concern that she's going to be condemned to hell. And on the basis of what reason? Now, this is something that will then, I think, relate to the topic I'm going to discuss tomorrow. Second topic of the day is the question of reason or faith. And part of what I'm going to emphasize is part of what it means to truly pursue your happiness, as Ankar began to indicate, is to use your mind to try to know reality. And that means not accepting things on faith. That means not surrendering to the fear of the condemnation and disagreement with other people, and to try to see the world for yourself, and not then, therefore, to see it through rumors and ancient texts, the reliability of which you have no understanding of. So that's something we can talk about a lot more tomorrow, I think.
Oi, primeiramente eu gostaria de parabenizar tanto tu quanto o palestrante anterior pela clareza nas ideias. São realmente muito interessantes todo o conceito de desconstruir, digamos assim, né, ver mais a fundo a questão do egoísmo e do altruísmo. E, necessariamente, eu tenho que fazer um paralelo com a palestra anterior, né, até por serem conceitos que andam de mãos dadas. Né, o altruísmo é o antônimo do egoísmo, são coisas antagônicas. E o próprio egoísmo, conforme foi mostrado muito bem, é o egoísmo virtuoso, né, digamos. Tem vários valores e princípios morais que foram listados: a produtividade, a independência, o orgulho, a honestidade, a integridade e justiça. Foram os que eu consegui anotar. E o altruísmo seria, na realidade, o sacrifício desses seus valores para uma outra pessoa, correto? Eu tenho uma dúvida que eu consigo entender muito bem, ou melhor, o que significa a produtividade, a independência, o orgulho, a honestidade, a integridade. São conceitos claros na minha mente. A minha dúvida é sobre um valor que eu não sei quem poderia definir, que é a justiça, o conceito de justiça. É um valor que quem define, né? E eu comecei a listar as possibilidades de quem poderia, porque é muito perigoso cada pessoa ter seu próprio senso de justiça. Porque o que é justo para mim pode não ser justo para ti. Correto? Quem definiria o que é justo? A igreja, o Estado, uma votação popular? Enfim, é uma dúvida que eu não consegui esclarecer ainda. Obrigada.
Sure. So one thing that you said just then was, who can define justice? What's justice for you is not necessarily justice for me. Now, that's a question that you could ask about any of the virtues that you said that you did understand. I mean, what's honest to you might not be honest to me. What's integrity to you might... So, and this is a question that often comes up with concepts of values and virtues, because there's a widespread belief that when you're talking about values, you're talking about opinions, as opposed to when you're talking about facts, those are scientific. So there's a widespread view that there's a dichotomy between fact and value. And justice is just one example of that, I think, among many. Ayn Rand named her philosophy Objectivism. And the reason that she called it that was because she thought, one of the reasons she called it that was because she thought that the principles of her philosophy were, in fact, objectively demonstrable, including especially ethics. And Keith gave a brief introduction to her view of ethics, but I can say just a little bit more that's relevant here. She thought ethics was a science. She thought that it could be based on objective facts. The most important of which is she thought that the concept of value is dependent on and presupposes the concept of a living organism. That it's only because living organisms require a definite course of action to maintain their existence over the course of their life that it makes sense to conceptualize certain things they do as good for their lives or bad for their lives. And if you're talking about relatively simple organisms, what they require, what's of value to them, is also relatively simple. They need food, they need light, they need air, etc. It depends on the organism, of course. But human beings are a very distinctive living thing, and they have also definite requirements. The one that Keith emphasized the most is that we need to use our rational mind to figure out how to get food and shelter and clothing and warmth, etc. And the mind itself, to function properly, has a whole set of its own requirements, many of which are listed in the virtues that Keith mentioned. But I'll just now comment on justice and what Rand's view of the objective validation of it would be. In one way, you can think of her view of justice as continuous with the kind of classical ancient Greek understanding of the term. Justice is granting to each what he is due. Of course, the big question is, well, what does he do? What does another person deserve? And again, continuous with her conception of what is distinctive about human life, Ayn Rand's view is, in our relationships with other people, the first and most important thing that we need to do is to make rational judgments of other people's character. We need to look at facts, not feelings, about the nature of another person's character. Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? By reference to the other values. Is this a person who produces things? So think of the example of I have two brothers, let's say. One of them is a productive person, another one is a deadbeat. There's a big difference between those two people, and those are differences, those are factual differences. The productive person is going to benefit my life. I'm going to be able to have a good relationship with him. I'm going to be able to learn from him, trade from him, friendship, of course. The person who's the deadbeat is going to be a drain on my life, and sometimes, in the worst cases, even threaten my life. They can't make things for themselves, so they sometimes steal from other people. So what justice is about recognizing the differences between people. Some people are virtuous, some people are vicious, and so granting them what they're due. That is, reward the ones who are good, punish or at least stay away from the ones who threaten your life. And there are factual differences between those kinds of people, and we need to recognize and then act on those differences. And this means many different kinds of things, but one thing it meant in particular for Rand is the importance of pronouncing moral judgment. That when someone does good things for you, you recognize them for that. When someone does bad things, even threatens you, you call them wicked. You call them evil, if they are. And you let your judgment be known. And there's a lot more. I mean, Atlas Shrugged is a book really about justice, because it's about what happens to a society that doesn't recognize the goodness of certain kinds of people, and what happens when those people decide that they've had enough.